Bonjour les amis, this is Véro. Impromptu live walk. Hey Roz. I'm doing this a little earlier than usual in the hope that my Australian or Kiwi friends will be able to catch this. I am located right now in a lovely part of Paris, which I know a lot of you know and enjoy visiting. Bonjour tout le monde. As I mentioned earlier today on the Friends with Véro Facebook page, I need to do some work in Paris towards the end of the week, so I'll be popping in, impromptu style, whenever I am in a neighborhood that I think you might be interested in seeing. And I so happen to be in one of these neighborhoods. We are on the famous Place de la Contrescarpe. The name is written on this cafe. In the heart of the 5th arrondissement, on the left bank. And I thought I would take you on a little stroll down a very popular street in this neighborhood, which is the famous Rue Mouffetard. It's typically lively during the daytime, at night. Bonjour Phyllis, bonjour tous les amis. You're popping in, that's wonderful. So it's 2:30 p.m. here. Lunchtime just wrapped up. And where I'm sitting right now on the beautiful Place de la Contrescarpe was a very lively scene about an hour ago, because we had a lot of the students who study in this neighborhood, especially at the nearby prestigious Lycée Henri IV, that high school created during the French Revolution. It's one of the most prestigious high schools in France. They were all sitting out here on Place de la Contrescarpe, enjoying sandwiches and lunches in the sun and smoking and chatting. And now, of course, they went back to school. I had lunch across from the high school, in fact, and I heard the bell when they called them back, which was really fun for me. Memories. I never went to that school, but I do remember the sound of that bell. So, La Rue Mouffetard is high, very high in Parisian vibes, day or night. And I hope you can hear me. I haven't seen any messages indicating otherwise, so hopefully the sound quality is good for you. If we were here in the late 12th century, very early 13th century, right about now, we would be sitting outside Paris. We would be sitting in an old bourg or village known as Saint-Médard, M-E-D-A-R-D, and we would be sitting right outside the city walls, built by a French king you all know as Philippe Augustus. He erected walls on the right bank, on the left bank, to protect the city while he was fighting and during the Third Crusade. And so this wall you can still find in places. In fact, there is a big section of that wall up that street a little bit to the right on Rue Clovis. You can still see that wall. But right about now, we would have been sitting outside the walls. And so you would have a lot of bistros. It wouldn't be very different from this, though it would be the Middle Ages, but you would have a lot of places to have a drink, a lot of places to eat. And the reason is, if you crossed the wall and went through one of the gates, there was one up the street, up La Rue Mouffetard over there, you would have had to pay more for your wine, for your food, because everything to go inside Paris, into the city walls, was heavily taxed. So many people came from Paris to buy food and wine and beer even in this area that sat outside the city walls. And I know a lot of people love La Rue Mouffetard, but I don't know if everybody is aware of all the layers of history in La Rue Mouffetard. It's a really cool street in Paris to talk about what happened to Paris over time. A few years ago, they excavated underground the proof that La Rue Mouffetard sat, in fact, on an old Gallo-Roman or Roman road leading to Lyon and southern France. So La Rue Mouffetard played a significant part for the Romans as well. And then through the Middle Ages, this neighborhood, like I said, this village, this was the countryside, known as Saint-Médard, kept growing, eventually was incorporated into the city of Paris, and it's now, of course, a beloved part of the 5th arrondissement. So why don't we start walking? I'm teaching a class late afternoon, so I can't be late, but there is time, so we're good. And as always, I will mention some anecdotes and histories and stories, about Parisian history, but also show you scenes of, Parisian life. And this is one of them here. You see it says piétonisation provisoire. This is COVID for you. A lot of streets in Paris have been closed off with special approval by the city of Paris. So restaurants can enjoy, can have more customers, try and have more customers at lunchtime. So what they do is they close off streets, and and the terrace will sprawl out on the sidewalk a lot more than they used to. So you'll see sometimes tables in the middle of the street, in fact. So here we are on La Rue Mouffetard, and just to remind you of what I just explained, this was the first section of La Rue Mouffetard over there. That was right before the city walls, right? And so we are going to go down this section. Now, you probably all know La Rue Mouffetard as a very lively street. This is early afternoon on a Thursday. It's going to be quiet, but it's not just the time of day. It's going to be quiet because of COVID as well. I have noticed when I walked here earlier, things have been really quiet. And some of the stores, I'm not sure, will reopen after this, and restaurants in particular. So you are going to get to see, my friends, a very quiet Rue Mouffetard right now. You know the street to be a market street. There are a lot of shops here, boulangerie, boucherie, a lot of high-end shops as well. And it's turned into quite a desirable neighborhood where real estate fetches, of course, very high prices. But this was not always the case. And La Rue Mouffetard and this neighborhood called Saint-Médard were really working class neighborhoods. Today, the students still come. You see here is a restaurant offering, formule étudiant, which is a special menu for students, €6.90. So students still come the way they did in the 1960s and even before that. But the people who live here have changed a lot. You might say it's a little bit more bourgeois now. Okay, I see some police. I don't know if they're here to check face masks, and I hope they don't stop me from filming, but if they do, I will resume afterwards, so don't worry. It could be that somebody tried to steal something from that store and she called the police. If you Google Rue Mouffetard, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the black and white photos that will pop up, will astound you. You will not believe the crowds in this street. It was always a very crowded street. People coming to buy food, people who lived here. Very, very busy street. Now, of course, it looks peaceful. Most of the buildings that are left on Rue Mouffetard date back to the 17th and 18th century, though a lot of them were fixed up in the 19th century. But 64 people for an impromptu walk, that's wonderful. I will point out as well as what COVID is doing. This bookstore, this independent bookstore, L'Arbre du Voyageur, has been here forever, the Traveler's Tree. Paris is good at keeping independent bookstores. This corner of La Rue Mouffetard has quite a few stories to tell. There is a fountain here. Behind this wall is a fountain. It's been here for a really long time, since the 17th century. And this fountain was actually commissioned by a queen who was married to Henry IV. We call him the good King Henry. He's also known as le Vert Galant because he was a womanizer. You've seen his statue on the Ile de la Cité facing the beautiful Place Dauphine, which he commissioned. When he died, he was assassinated at the beginning of the 17th century. His widow, Queen Mary de Medici, had herself, she had a beautiful palace built, which you know today as the Senate building in the Luxembourg Gardens. And to do that, she brought water from springs outside Paris, and she built a magnificent aqueduct that's actually still in operation today. And like her husband before he died, she was quite preoccupied with bringing water to Parisians, to certain neighborhoods in Paris. And she had this fountain built here because the left bank was always behind the right bank. The right bank had a lot of fountains before the left bank even had a few. Another queen played a big part. Well, she was more of an unofficial queen, I suppose. I don't know if you heard about Madame de Maintenon, late 17th century. She married King Louis XIV, the Sun King. It was his second wedding, and she married him secretly. But Madame de Maintenon was very pious, and she had friends in an abbey that was located in the building right across from us. And she wanted to help her friends as well. So the fountain that Mary de Medici had built, Madame de Maintenon commissioned Véro, the famous architect who worked on Versailles, and talked her husband, Louis XIV, the Sun King, into building this beautiful wall to protect the fountain. So her friends, who were the sisters who lived across the street here, would have access to water. Today, this building is not a convent anymore. It houses the Garde Républicaine, which is one of the elite bodies in the French gendarmerie. They have different places in Paris, and that's what it is today. So quite a lot of history here in this corner of la Rue Mouffetard. Now, I'd like to show you the street, la Rue du Pot de Fer. This is where you see what COVID has done to cities like Paris that rely on tourism a lot. This street normally, early afternoon, even at 2:30 p.m. would be very busy. The restaurants that you see in the background would actually be, the terraces, there wouldn't be a table available. And when I walked up the street earlier, I noticed a lot of the restaurants have not reopened after COVID. So you have a few, and I'm sure it's busier on the weekends, but I was really shocked at how quiet this lively little street is now. It's a little hard for me to read your comments. I hope you understand. The reason is I have to take off my glasses because my face mask just fogs up. And the glasses fog up and then I can't see anything. So it's hard for me to read comments. But I can say a little hello. Bonjour. Véronique, Véro, for those of you who haven't met me yet. I am a long-time travel blogger, a Paris-based tour guide, and I'm also the person who runs this Facebook community and has run it for about 10 years now. So thank you for being here today. I love live streaming. No, actually I don't love it, but I do it. Sometimes I have fun with it, sometimes it stresses me out. But I try to share what I see because I know so many of you cannot travel to France and Paris right now. Bonjour les amis, I see your messages pop up. So I will be sharing more things before the end of the week. And if you are a Friends with Véro club member, some very good people are supporting my new business, which is to share my love of Paris and France on Patreon. You have the information in the notes for this video. And they will be meeting with me on Saturday for a special live event. So look into that if you'd like to see more of Paris. I can see the wind's picking up, so I hope you don't hear that too much in the microphone. Thought I'd say a quick little hello. So here is again La Garde Républicaine, one of the places. You see those terraces I was telling you about for restaurants? So now with special authorization from the Paris City Hall, they can actually spread out into the street and take up quite a few parking spaces. So this measure is not super popular with everyone. Those who have to drive in Paris and need their cars to work, for example, are not happy with what's been going on lately. So it's a bit controversial. Here's a beautiful door. You know, Paris is famous for beautiful doors, and here is the door that marks the entrance of La Garde Républicaine. Whoops, the building. All right, can you see I'm having difficulty here? And I only had water at lunch. Maybe I should have had that wine after all. So again, today, very interesting street, La Rue Mouffetard. You have some eateries, Greek food, kebabs here. You have bars at night. Quite a lively scene. Not now though. Restaurants, shishi shops as I call them. Now, I don't know if you'll believe this, but in the 1960s, nobody wanted to live here. It was a very close-knit community. The former village of Saint-Médard, the people who lived here, they were poor students or they were immigrants and they were blue-collar workers. They loved it here, but they lived in those buildings that you see now on both sides of the street that have been fixed up since then. But a lot of these buildings, at least half of them in the 1960s, did not even have running water, let alone bathrooms inside the apartments. Nobody wanted to live around La Rue Mouffetard back then, except for the people who were already here and enjoyed it because they all knew each other. Here's a pub that will probably get livelier tonight. This is a lot Paris these days. A lot of neighborhoods get really quiet during the daytime, and it's not just because there aren't enough tourists. It's also because COVID has changed a lot of the way people work. You know, a lot of people still work from home. A lot of companies are letting employees work from home. So a lot of people don't come to Paris to work anymore, which means they don't go out for lunch. And so that's been a big blow to a lot of restaurants as well. So a good question would be to see what's going to happen when this is all over. Is this going to continue? We don't know. 73 people, this is amazing. The sun's right above me now. So again, those houses, 17th, 18th century. And the foundations are built on former medieval homes, of course. This is one of the neighborhoods in Paris that was not touched by Baron Haussmann and Napoleon III during the Second Empire. There are a few. Nearby, they had a great time building the big Rue Monge, M-O-N-G-E, but they did not really touch this section, at least, of La Rue Mouffetard. But I will mention what happened a little further down. So here you still see people having lunch, a late lunch. Lunchtime is winding down. So this street has turned, I used to know this street back in the 80s. It's changed a lot. So from the 60s, it's changed a lot. And from the 80s, it's changed a lot. Like now you have all these shops that sell bio or organic stuff, healthy food like Naturalia. That tells you the clientele has changed a lot around here as well. Different crowd. Former working class neighborhood. I really encourage you to look up photos of La Rue Mouffetard in the 50s and 60s, and you will see what it looked like then. Definitely a working class neighborhood. Now, what you don't see when you walk up and down this street is that you have passageways under the buildings. Some are quite large, like this one, but there are other smaller ones. And those passageways have actually been here since the 17th century. Henry IV, the good King Henry I mentioned earlier, asked people when they built houses on both sides, he asked them to leave an access for whoever was bringing merchandise into the street and in the rest of the neighborhood. So you would have those passageways so the horse-drawn carts could get through. And you can still see them as you walk along La Rue Mouffetard. A lot of them are private now because buildings have, people have locked them up with gates and DG codes, but some of them are still open. I see a message in Spanish. I promise to read your messages later. I'll go back to them. In fact, check this out. Here is exactly what I was describing. So you see, somebody built this probably in the 17th century. It's been touched up in the 19th by, afterwards, of course. Very low buildings, as you would find outside Paris. This was more of a village style outside Paris. Montmartre was like that too. And then you would have those passageways, hope I won't lose the connection in there, that King Henry had them dig in so that horse-drawn carriages could get through. And they have very interesting names that reflect on the history of the neighborhood. And as you get behind these things, you see how quiet it is on this side? And a lot of these buildings have very pretty courtyards with little gardens that you would never know are there if you stayed on the street on the other side. Now in the 60s, when the buildings were really old and run down, the courtyards were where people just piled up junk that they didn't want. Today, of course, you can imagine they are coveted. Having a courtyard in this neighborhood and a little garden or a terrace overlooking a private courtyard is something everybody probably wants to do. Here's a shoe store, and across from that shoe store, you have another of those passages I just described. And they connect streets if you keep going. Here's a nice name, this shop. So you have big brands here. That tells you really the clientele has changed here. It's not just the tourists, it's also the people who live here. Bit of a different architectural style. I hope that's not too much architectural information. I just love buildings, as you probably know, as a lover of urban spaces. When you see brick like this, and you see that a lot in the suburbs, you know that these buildings were probably erected at the beginning of the 20th century, 1920s, 1930s. Brick was cheaper, so that's what they did at that time. Very different look from what we have on the rest of the street, as you can see. But look at this. Let's see if I can show you in spite of the sun. You have those two very tall buildings facing each other with some lucky people that have a terrace up there. You see? So these are definitely from the maybe 1920s, 1930s. And then this is what La Rue Mouffetard is famous for. Beautiful fromager, a fromagerie, produce shops, boucherie. Anybody's tempted by the cheese? You have a reflection, you can see it. Look at all the goat cheese lined up in there. My favorite section is goat cheese, le chèvre. It's kind of nice to see the street this quiet, actually. Yeah. I'm not used to it. And you have, of course, you need to have a wine shop, right? La Fontaine au Vin, the fountain, the wine fountain, with quite a few bottles. Yeah, people wear masks because, I see a question pop up. People wear masks because if you don't, there is a €135 fine. So they don't wear them because they approve of masks very often. They wear them because they don't want to pay the fine. I just thought I'd mention that. Look at this very pretty pâtisserie. So a lot of nice names, right? Sugar Crush. It's a mix of stores, really. Here's a kind of a clothing, but cheaper clothing. So here's a neighborhood where you really see Paris as it evolved from the Roman times, when this was a Roman road, to the Middle Ages, to the 19th century, to the 1960s when it was still pretty run down, and now a pretty touristy neighborhood with coveted real estate that still retains a village-like atmosphere, which is why people come here. This was always my favorite section of the street, actually. Here is your primeur. The primeur is the store that sells produce, vegetables and fruit. You always have them in good neighborhoods. And here's a boucherie, a butcher. Cute little bistro here, le verre à pied. Un verre à pied is a glass that has a stem. So not your Duralex glass that you see in all the shishi bistros now, a glass with an actual stem. Here's a great name for a traiteur, a deli, comestible. And he does takeout. This is an Asian deli. Plat à emporter, which means takeout. We need to have our boulanger, of course, le fournil de Mouffetard, boulanger, pâtissier. Mexican restaurant on the left, so there's a little bit of everything, right? Where is my street? There is one I want to show you. Oh, there's the one, Rue d'Aubenton. So if I kept walking here, along the street, Rue d'Aubenton, I would find La Rue Monge, which is the street that Napoleon III and Baron Haussmann dug out in the 19th century. But I want to show you something in the street because it's pretty cool. Bonjour, monsieur. All right, let's turn around. Look at these. The houses on both sides of the street at the end here are rumored to be some of the oldest ones in the neighborhood, 17th and 16th century. Now look at the walls on this one. Do you see how the wall looks like it's pushing out? And then as you go up on the house, it looks like it's receding. So this is something that they did because in the Middle Ages, when you built a house, the foundations were not wood with some iron and heavy stone like they were when Haussmann rebuilt Paris in the 19th century. And you had to figure out a way for the house, the structure, to carry the top floors. And that's the reason the houses weren't that high. Isn't that neat? So in the 19th century, the walls were covered. You know, nobody wanted to see stone on the facades, but now that they are remodeling them, you can see that they clean up the facade so you can see the original stone, probably very close to what it looked like in the Middle Ages or later, since these were probably built around the 17th century. Isn't that neat? This one, the other one recedes as well. You can see it here. But the top looks kind of straight, which tells us it was probably added on later. But the first section here really reclines. or recedes, I should say. So there's a lot to look at in Rue Mouffetard, especially in the side streets, those side alleyways, if you can access them. Gotta have your Franprix. It's one of the most popular supermarket chains in the city of Paris right now. They're usually pretty small, but if you forgot your butter or milk when you were making a recipe, they come in handy because they close late. If it's a real neighborhood, you'll likely have une droguerie as well. Droguerie sells everything. Bricolage, do it yourself. Marchand de couleurs. He sells colors. It could be paint. And then you have those carts that French women and men love to use when they go shopping. Many people have them. They're not granny carts in France. In fact, they're pretty cool. There's a trendy Spanish brand, which is this one, Rolser, R-O-L-S-E-R. And they're very cool and so handy when you shop at specialty shops. Trying not to get hit by anyone, that would be bad. Au Jardin de Mouffetard, Mouffetard's garden. Tiny little place with fresh produce. Oh, it's got a beautiful marquise on top. You see this awning? This awning is, it's very old. It's very pretty. It's called une marquise, M-A-R-Q-U-I-S-E. So we are reaching, and here we have two very, what I call chichi stores. This one specializes in products from Provence. We are reaching the end of La Rue Mouffetard on this beautiful little square outside a church that's been here for a really long time, though it's evolved over time. Église Saint-Médard, named after the old neighborhood. This church is really interesting. If you look at the top of it, you can see the 15th century and the flamboyant Gothic style. That's reflected in some of the stained glass windows inside, some of the oldest in Paris. And then if you look at the main door and how clean the lines are, that tells you it's probably 18th century. Neoclassical, they called it. So it's got a little bit of everything. And on the little square behind it, in a little garden behind it, there used to be a famous cemetery. And today it's a peaceful square where people sit outside. More bistros. So if you came here on market day, or if you see pictures online of La Rue Mouffetard that starts right about here, outside the church, you will not believe the crowds. So for me, it's really strange to see it like this. There's a neat facade I want to show you right behind me. I hope the sun won't stop me from, let's see. Whoops, too fast. Do you see this? It's actually wild animals that are carved inside the wall. And that was not, it's not that old. It was probably done in the 1930s, but it used to be a butcher shop. And so the artist, I guess, carved out the walls to represent animals. Better than a shop sign, I'd say. And today, right under it, is Androuet, one of the most famous, most respected cheesemongers in Paris, and another fancy boutique. I like coming at this specific spot because, and I'll wrap up in a few minutes, so I can get home and get ready for my online French class tonight with my intermediate students. I am a tour guide and a French language instructor. Let's see. Look at this beautiful shop here. Sells a lot of produce. La culture maraîchère, which is really growing fruit and vegetable, has always been around here in Paris, ever since the Middle Ages, all around Paris. There's very good produce grown around Paris, actually, still today. So I'm going to step here to show you something that I like looking at. We can see the church, Saint-Médard, from the side here. I think there's a funeral today. I see people waiting outside the church. So this square is called La Place Georges Moustaki. You may or may not know Georges Moustaki. He's a very respected artist who died a few years ago, was very, very popular through the 60s and 70s. Many artists came to this neighborhood. Actors. So, the reason I like this square, well, that's a pretty fountain, and look at you can tell it's the end of summer, it's very lush, it's beautiful. I like this spot because you can really see how Paris has changed over the centuries. We just came from the only surviving section of La Rue Mouffetard, which is less than 1 kilometer long. We just came out from the side of that building over there. And we've talked about Gallo-Roman times, we've talked about the Middle Ages, we've talked about the 17th century. And then the 19th century came along, Baron Haussmann, working for Napoleon III, and you know, they dug out those big avenues and built those newer, more modern buildings. And this used to be, what I'm looking at over there, used to be La Rue Mouffetard as well. But the Gobelin neighborhood took over, and the street officially stops where I'm standing now. But do you see the difference? We're looking at 19th century Paris right now. Wide avenue, those symmetrical buildings. So it's amazing that you can be here standing at a small intersection in Paris and have 19th century Paris and I guess 21st century Paris look at you in the face when you just left a neighborhood that has so much history back there. And that's the magic of Paris for you. That's why so many people love Paris. So maybe what I'll do is wrap up in this little square, as we say, which is a public garden. Oh, I want to show you something. You know, the French smoke a lot, and they're not very good at throwing away their cigarette butts where they're supposed to throw them away. So now what we have are these little boxes, and this is erased. I can't really read, but so they're asking a question. It's like a poll they're taking to get people interested in the box where they will toss their butts, cigarette butts. Are you more Engrenage or Game of Thrones? So they have them vote, and they're hoping that when people read this, they will remember to, put out their cigarette and dump the cigarette butt in there. That's what you have to do with French people, because if you tell them to do it, they won't unless you find them, which is what's happening with face masks. That's a perfect place to wrap up. Right on the side of our beautiful church. Look at these beautiful windows. That's flamboyant Gothic for you, definitely 15th century. If you've never been inside this church, go and see it. They added a beautiful chapel in the 18th century, and it's really pretty. And some of the stained glass work is magnificent too. I don't know how long I've been going, 20, 30 minutes, I'm not sure. But I want to say goodbye in person. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this little stroll down the Rue Mouffetard, talking about history and architecture and watching Parisians go about their 2020 lives, I guess. It's a nice way of putting it. Thank you so much. There will be more live streaming before the weekend, and during the weekend, you know, we have Heritage Days this weekend. Not sure what I'll be able to catch, but I'll show you something fun. There's always something to look at in Paris. So I'm gonna go home now, getting ready for my French class, and I will read your comments on the metro if the strike doesn't bug me, but I think we'll be good. The strike hasn't been followed that much, so we'll be fine. Au revoir les amis, à bientôt.